So we had a fascinating moment here in Washington. Lula, the president of Brazil, newly elected, visiting D.C., visiting allies, sat for an interview, actually, with CNN's Christiane Amanpour, where she pressed him over Ukraine, and he refused to bow to say that he would send arms to Ukraine, instead pressing for negotiation. Extraordinary, actually, for any major power in the global south, or really anywhere, to talk this way. Let's take a listen to what he said.
It looks like you're going to come up against President Biden on a key defense of the United States of democracy around the world, and that is Ukraine. You do not believe, I don't think, in the Western support for Ukraine's defense, and you have said it many times. Why not? I mean, some people have asked, in fact, an article, why is Lula so committed to democracy at home and not abroad?
Well, I am highly committed with democracy in any part of the planet Earth. What I believe is that in the case of Ukraine and Russia, it is necessary to have someone talking about peace. It's necessary that we should build up interlocutors to talk with the different parties that are in confrontation. That's my thesis. We need to find interlocutors that could sit with President Putin and show to him the mistake that he made to invade the territorial integrity of the Ukrainian territory. And we have to show to Ukraine that they have to talk more so that we can avoid this war. We have to stop the war. And so why I'm going to talk with President Biden, I don't know what he's going to say to me, but what I want to say to him is the following. It is necessary to build a set of countries to negotiate peace.
And he asked you to send his leopards to Ukraine, and you said no.
No, it's not the tanks. It was ammunition.
Okay, or ammunition.
It was. I didn't want to send, because if I sent to the ammunition, I would join the war. If I sent the ammunition from Brazil, the ammunition that you're asking for.
But you just agreed that it was defense.
This will take us to war. I don't want to go join the war. I want to end with the war. I don't want to join the war. I want to end with the war.
That was an extraordinary moment there. I mean, I have not heard that from a major leader. Let's go ahead and put this up there on the screen. So actually, while he was here in Washington, President Biden pressed him heavily to actually send ammunition to Ukraine, and he refused President Biden to his face, saying that that was not what's going to happen. He condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine, but he suggested that Zelensky and NATO at least, quote, share some blame for the war, and he's refusing to sell weapons to Ukraine to try and maintain neutrality in the conflict. So he says, quote, we need to find interlocutors who can sit with President Putin to show him the mistake he made to invade Ukraine's territory. We have to show Ukraine that they need to talk more so we can end this war. So you haven't heard this from anybody. I think the craziest part was when he said, I don't want to join this war. I want to end this war, and talking about the conditions necessary to push towards a negotiation. Now, look, obviously, Brazil, they're probably not going to turn the conflict either way, but you know, it represents millions and millions of people, one of the biggest powers in all of Latin America. So what his position is on this could be a leading indicator, at least from their position, and some room for dissent in kind of the global environment. And it would also be possible President Putin sees this. This could be a major opening right now as to Lula's own role in perhaps bringing an end to this.
Yeah, I mean, that's clearly his view, is he wants to maintain somewhat of a neutral stance so that he could be trusted as a figure to be involved in potential negotiations to bring this thing to an end. And, you know, I'm doing my monologue today on an extraordinary interview from the former Israeli prime minister indicating, again, something we already had hints of, but confirming that early in this process, there was a potential peace deal that was coming together. No guarantees. No one's saying it was certain. But according to the Israeli prime minister, there was like a 50-50 shot. And the U.S. and NATO, but led by the U.S., actively said, we don't want the deal, we want the war. So Lula's perspective here that he's offering, where he's talking about, he's critical of Biden, and he has been before in a Time magazine interview where he was saying, listen, before this war started, he could have flown to Moscow. He could have engaged more. Instead, they sort of laughed off Putin's proposals and his red lines. And of course, you know, with regards to NATO, ignored them for decades. This is a view that is actually widespread outside of the U.S. and outside of Western media. It's just extremely rare that a U.S. audience actually hears another way of looking at this conflict and another way of looking at the history and how we got there and exactly who is to blame and how much. Now, obviously, as we have said a million times here, Russia is to blame for the invasion, but to ignore all of the context of how we got here and to just paint Putin as this like madman who can't be reasoned with means that, of course, you're not going to support diplomatic negotiations. At the same time, Rand Corporation, which is largely funded by the Pentagon, is out saying, the most likely outcome here is not that Russia will win or Ukraine will win, but that we will have a stalemate and that it is a disaster if we end up in a long war. It's very difficult, though, given how long this has already gone on and the level of atrocities that have been committed, to now get back to the peace table and the negotiating table and be able to come up with the type of deal that was coming together in the early days. So, you know, I really commend Lula for sticking to his guns here, for not mincing words, for laying out exactly how he sees this conflict. And just to give you, you know, a sense of this guy and how different the way that he talks about this conflict is from anything that you hear in the U.S. press, in that Time magazine article, he was talking about Zelensky and he said, listen, you're encouraging this guy, and then he thinks he's the cherry on your cake. We should be having a serious conversation. Okay, you were a nice comedian, but let us not make war for you to show up on TV. He then went on to be very critical of Putin as well. So this is someone who has been unafraid of speaking a very different way about this conflict than anything you're going to hear anywhere else.
Oh, absolutely. Okay, so let's move on to the next part here about the actual offensive. And this really is the testing ground of what a quote-unquote stalemate might even look like, and how Russia has, if at all, regrouped, what their power will look like. Let's put this up there on the screen. Russian offensive in Ukraine appearing to begin some of the preliminary movements. So we've had operations and troop movements around eastern Ukraine that have increased sharply in the last couple of months as we move away from the more muddier season and the ground becomes easier to use. So here's what they say. They believe that the pace of Moscow operations over the past week has accelerated, specifically in western Luhansk, citing a lot of new skirmishes that are happening along the front line, with marginal advances in that region. So it now appears to be committing a much more of its forces that were held in reserve ever since that highly controversial military draft that happened last fall. And what the actual push on the line will look like remains unclear. So there's 30 different settlements all across eastern Ukraine, which have come under intense fire over the last couple of months. Specifically, also, we remember Bakhmut, which President Zelensky visited immediately before visiting the United States. What they say is that the all-out multi-front assault is very unlikely to occur at the same moment. Instead, they will likely prioritize a major advance aimed at seizing the Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts. Present indicators suggest that Moscow is planning to launch this offensive sometime in late February and in mid-March. So the traditional skirmishes, getting the intelligence, getting the men ready, moving material and supplies up to the front line appear to be coming now. This is also going to be a big test for the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians had that stunning spring offensive where they took back a tremendous amount of territory relative to what was expected of them. Now we've been pumping them full of billions of dollars. We've got new weapon systems that are on the ground there. The tanks and all that are not operational, as I believe, because they still need to be trained on. But nonetheless, you know, they've been able to regroup. They've been pounded from Russian air power, but they've got now to test whether they can keep some of the areas that they withhold, and can they withstand against the actual Russian offensive. Whether it turns into a stalemate or not is all going to be proven probably in the next 2 or 3 months or so of probably terrible fighting, which is really, you know, that's the saddest part.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, the general understanding is that Russia's goal in this new offensive would be to take back the parts of the Donbass region that they had lost to Ukraine in particular in that spring offensive. You know, the tanks haven't arrived yet. There's a reason why Zelensky has been flying around, you know, really putting the screws to leaders in the West to provide fighter jets and other capabilities, because they know that ultimately, I mean, the fundamental balance in this conflict remains what it was on day one, even as Russia has dramatically underperformed, which is Russia just has way more men that they can ultimately throw at this thing if they want, way more munitions, way more of an industrial base. And so, you know, Zelensky and Ukraine are wholly dependent on the West providing the resources and material that they need in order to be able to maintain their position or push forward. But again, you know, the most likely outcome here isn't that Ukraine is able to achieve total victory and isn't that Russia is able to achieve total victory. It's a brutal, bloody stalemate that could go on endlessly if there isn't some attempt at a diplomatic resolution.
Yeah, that's really where things appear to stand right now. We got some maps we can put up on the screen there if people are interested, and it just shows what we were talking about, those who are watching, where the actual front line is in the Donbass and where some of the expected war will take place. So it's going to be a big testing ground for the Ukrainian forces and for the Russian forces, frankly, because if they crumble or if this is not victorious, even without any of the advanced weapons that we have provided to Ukraine, then Russia is in some serious trouble in the years to come. And it would only really mean that they're going to have to escalate even more, perhaps another draft, a vicious cycle there. So either side has got a lot to lose based on what the outcome is here.
Hey guys, ready or not, 2024 is fully upon us now, and Saagar and I have been brainstorming ways that we can really up our game for this critical election.
Yeah, we rely on our premium subs to expand our coverage, to add staff, to upgrade the studio. We just want to give you the best independent coverage of this election, which is possible. So if you can help us out, become a premium subscriber today, breakingpoints.com, or the link is down here in the description video. It really means the world to us, and if you like what we're all about, this is the best possible way to keep us 100% independent, working only for you.